Why is it that the very moment you wake up, the moment you realize how society manipulates you, how shallow most ambitions truly are, your motivation dies? Think about it. Before your so-called awakening, you had goals, money, status, approval, the things society told you would make you successful. You chased them like a man possessed. You had energy, even if that energy was poisoned by illusion. But then, something happened. You started questioning everything. You realized the job you're breaking your back for is meaningless. The approval of others? Empty. The possessions you thought would give you happiness? Hollow. And now, you feel nothing. No drive, no hunger, no fire. Just this heavy emptiness, like your soul has collapsed in on itself. This is the paradox of spiritual awakening. Instead of clarity giving you strength, it feels like it has robbed you of all purpose. You see the illusion, yes, but you don't yet know how to live beyond it. Carl Jung understood this psychological abyss better than anyone. He called it the night sea journey, the descent into darkness that comes when the illusions of the ego are shattered and the deeper self has not yet fully emerged. You see, when you awaken, the ego begins to crumble, and the ego was the thing giving you all that restless motivation. It wanted to prove itself, to compete, to dominate, to collect rewards. That was your fuel. But once you pierce through the illusion, once you realize it's all a performance, you take away the ego's oxygen. Suddenly, you no longer want to play the game. And here's the dangerous part. Most people mistake this collapse for failure. They think, I'm broken, I've lost my drive, I'm weaker now. But what's actually happening is far deeper. You are shedding a false fire, a counterfeit energy that never belonged to you in the first place. What you're experiencing is not weakness, it is transformation. Jung would say, the motivation you lost wasn't really yours. It belonged to the persona, the mask you wore for the world. That mask wanted recognition, applause, validation. It burned with ambition because it was terrified of being nothing. But the self, the deeper, eternal self, does not move from fear. It does not seek validation. It does not hustle to prove its existence. So when awakening cracks open your illusions, you feel like your fuel source is gone. In reality, you've just unplugged from the false battery. This is why awakening feels like death, because a part of you has died. The part that chased shadows, the part that begged for crumbs of approval, the part that thought status and success would save you. That self is withering. And yet, here's the truth you must confront. This death is not the end. It is the threshold, the crossing over from counterfeit fire to authentic power. The problem is, most people never make it across. They awaken, yes. They see through the game. But instead of discovering a higher will, they sink into nihilism. They drift. They retreat into passivity. They drown in despair. Because here's the terrifying question. Once the lies are stripped away, what is left to live for? This is the question Jung forces us to face, and it is the question that will shape the entire rest of your life. Not, how do I get motivated again? But, what is worth being motivated for? That is where your true awakening begins. So let's return to the central question. Why does awakening kill your motivation? The answer lies in Carl Jung's framework of the psyche. To understand what you're going through, you need to know three key forces: the shadow, the persona, and the self. First, the persona, your mask. This is the social costume you wear, the role you perform to fit in. It's the ambitious employee, the charming friend, the good son. It thrives on external approval. It hungers for validation. Most of your old motivation came from this mask, your desire to be admired, respected, or envied. When awakening shatters the illusion, this mask begins to fall away, and when it falls, so does the shallow fuel that once powered you. You no longer care about climbing ladders or showing off, but you also don't know what does matter. Then comes the shadow. This is the dark, repressed side of you, the parts of yourself you deny, fear, or bury. Awakening often forces the shadow into the light. Suddenly, you feel waves of despair, anger, emptiness. You realize you've been living for the wrong reasons, and the pain of that realization can be crushing. The shadow whispers, "Everything is meaningless. Why even try?" Most people get stuck here. They confuse the shadow's voice with truth, when really it's only a passage. You are meant to face it, not surrender to it. Finally, there is the self. Not the ego, not the persona, not the shadow, but the deeper, eternal center of your being. The self is not hungry for approval. It is not motivated by fear. It moves from something higher: alignment, authenticity, truth. And here is the paradox. You cannot access the self until the old motivations die. That's why awakening feels like destruction. It is destruction, but of everything false. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are, instead of who the world told you to be. But individuation always begins with collapse, the death of the mask, the confrontation with the shadow, the silence where the old fire used to be. This is why your motivation died, because for the first time in your life, you are no longer running on borrowed fire. The ego's games have lost their grip on you. The persona has lost its meaning, and the shadow is screaming at you to quit, to sink, to disappear. But if you endure, something else awakens. You begin to sense a deeper energy, not frantic, not desperate, not tied to status or applause, but steady, silent, real. This is the energy of the self. It does not chase, it creates. It does not beg, it chooses. This is why most people fear awakening, because it strips away the shallow comforts, the distractions, the illusions. It demands you stand face to face with yourself, naked and unmasked, and most cannot bear that silence. They would rather return to the old game. They would rather stay plugged into illusions, chasing recognition, drowning themselves in busyness, because the silence terrifies them. But Jung is clear. This silence is not the end. It is initiation. The death of counterfeit ambition makes room for authentic purpose. And yet you must ask yourself, are you willing to cross that threshold? Because crossing it requires sacrifice. You must give up the identity you built. You must stop clinging to shallow goals. You must let the old version of you truly die. Only then can the self step forward. So the question is no longer, why did my motivation die? The real question is, am I strong enough to let that death transform me?
Now let's go deeper, because this isn't just about you. This collapse of motivation after awakening, it reflects something far larger, a sickness in society itself. Carl Jung warned of this. He saw modern man drifting into a spiritual void, addicted to shallow distractions, clinging to external success while starving inside. Most people today are still trapped in this illusion. They grind for status, money, and validation, not because it fulfills them, but because they fear what will surface in silence. You, however, are different. You've seen through the illusion. That's why your motivation collapsed. You unplugged from the machine. You stopped being a slave to external goals. But society doesn't reward this. In fact, it punishes it. Because a man who no longer bows to the game becomes dangerous. Why? Because he cannot be controlled. He is no longer driven by fear or greed. He no longer obeys out of insecurity. He has stepped outside the trap. This is the moment Jung described as the confrontation with meaning, when the old structures fall away, and the only question that matters stares you in the face. What is worth living for? Make no mistake, most people fail here. They awaken, yes. They see the emptiness of social games, but instead of rising to something higher, they sink into despair. They become passive, bitter, nihilistic. They rot in the silence instead of transforming in it. This is why so many awakened men drift into endless cynicism. They tear everything down but build nothing in its place. They mistake awakening for enlightenment. But Jung would say, you are not enlightened until you have created meaning. This is the task of individuation, to uncover a purpose that does not come from society's applause, but from the depths of your own self. A purpose rooted in truth, not illusion. What does that look like? It looks like creating, not competing. It looks like building something real, not chasing validation. It looks like aligning your life with what resonates deeply, even if no one applauds. And here's the revelation. True motivation is not frantic. It is not desperate. It is not noisy. True motivation, authentic motivation, flows quietly from within, like a river that cannot be stopped. When you discover this deeper source, you no longer need external fire. You carry your own. But here's the danger. Society will still try to pull you back. It will tempt you with shiny distractions, with promises of success, with endless noise. Because if you fully awaken, if you fully align with the self, you become free. And free men are a threat to the system. So ask yourself, will you go back to sleep? Will you plug back into the illusion just to feel the shallow rush of false motivation again? Or will you endure the silence long enough for something greater to be born? Because make no mistake, this collapse of your old drive is not the end. It is initiation. It is the doorway to a deeper will, a higher power, a truer fire. Carl Jung put it simply, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that privilege is not given to the weak. It is given only to those willing to let their old self die. So if you feel broken, empty, unmotivated, understand this, you are not broken. You are being remade. The mask has fallen. The shadow has spoken. Now the self waits for you to rise. This is why your motivation died. Not to end you, but to awaken you. The question is, will you answer the call?